Petya is Deputy Director of the Research Department at the International Monetary Fund.
We do have good news that inflation is coming down at the global level, and it's happening in an environment where growth is actually also quite resilient. That said, the not so good news is that there are quite a few downside risks that have emerged, and that's certainly something that we are watching closely.
So what are those risks? What are the biggest issues currently facing the world economy?
Well, there is the risk of intensification of geopolitical conflict. And on top of that, there is the possibility that trade protectionism increases further. There's also the possibility that labor markets weaken more than what we are expecting at the moment, or that we could see financial turbulence of the type that we experienced in August with a sudden repricing in markets.
Well, you mentioned the issue of geopolitical uncertainty. This IMF meeting taking place at the same time as the BRICS summit, where President Putin has called for an alternative to the IMF as it doesn't represent their interests. Is that somehow symbolic of a growing divide between East and West competing for influence?
Well, we have seen trends of geoeconomic fragmentation that started a while back, and I think that is having an impact on the global economy as well. What we have observed is that even though trade has held up at the aggregate level quite well, what we've seen is a lot more trade within blocks as opposed to in between. And this is one of the concerns that we have, that going forward, further deterioration in that respect in terms of this geoeconomic fragmentation could be another headwind that the world economy faces.
China's economy, of course, hugely important for the world as a whole. A lot of stimulus measures have, of course, been announced by China. Many want to see more. What's your assessment?
Well, we have China growing at 4.8 there, coming down to 4.5 next year. But this year we have a small downgrade in our forecast, which just reflects the data that we have observed. Some of the measures that were announced, in particular the ones by the Monetary Authority, they have been incorporated in our forecast, but the most recent wave of measures have not been incorporated yet. And then at the same time, we've also seen the Q3 data that surprised on the downside. So when we put it all together, I would say that for this year, although the downward surprise in the Q3 data poses a risk in a negative direction, then the most recent measures that have been announced that are very much in line with some of our recommendations, they pose a risk on the upside.
So some countries clearly are bouncing back, recovering more strongly than others. Who should we be worried about? Who needs more help?
Well, at the aggregate level, what we observe is that advanced economies have certainly made up the lost ground after the pandemic, and their activity levels are basically where they had been projected before. Inflation is also coming down, and it's really mostly emerging markets and the low-income countries that have suffered the most. Especially now we see many countries affected by conflict, affected by climate shocks, and they need help, which is something that we emphasize in our report yet again.